So then, we are back with more understandings from the time of the Second Tabernacle services, where we find then the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Israelic lineage, so then we can understand the time of the end as per Yeshayahu the prophet. We find layers of understanding of the spring feast, the autumn feast, and also the returning of the cities of the Messiah laid waste for many centuries. As we read then Yeshayahu, it was explained before many times. Yeshayahu was a very unique prophet, and he wrote his prophecies extremely compacted, because during the time of his service, unfortunately the nation was not obedient, and he was then obviously, firstly, returning the people back to the instructions was his first objective. The second was then fighting, in quote, against the political leaders of his time. Thirdly, giving them directions as they were obedient in what was taking place then in the very near future, and then prophesying the very time of the coming of the Messiah, and then the 1,000 years of his reign, then 1,000 years of deceit, then the restoration period, and also the autumn feast and post-autumn feast. If you understand times and seasons, it's a very long time ever since, unfortunately, he was then destroyed. He was sawn in half by those ignorant people of his time. Since we understand the Creator never made a mistake, and he won't ever, let's then understand what's going on with Yeshayahu, the 61st chapter, as the Messiah. Then he was reading sections of it, and he related with himself as the person completing then the spring feast, and then the second section of the first portion was the autumn feast, and he did not read this person. But let's then evaluate what's going on in the world as far as the nations and the changes taking place in NATO, for instance. Now they have this rapid response force, and what this is going to do, as far as we can understand, as United States is trying then obviously once again engage themselves in some sort of a conflict to get arms then sold. It's always like this. But let's then understand as far as the problem with Ukraine. The Ukrainians obviously provoked the war with Mr. Putin. And then obviously they did not like the Crimea of being part of them once again, and they had some doubts, and they started these skirmish for no reason. Obviously there are people trying to work a ceasefire, and thus far until today, the 5th of September, we find ourselves then reading a section in the newspaper that they were able then to achieve this objective. However, what can we expect of nations trying to interfere with the holy instructions? Let's read then Daniel the 11th chapter. It speaks of the northern kingdom. And during the time of the restoration period, Daniel, as being a person very acquainted with economy, with armies, he had the experience of working under many kings. Let's then read a section of Daniel the 11th chapter. Explains then the kingdom of the north, and in the time of the end, then the kingdom of the north shall come with a great army and much equipment. What can we understand of the northern kingdom as then Mr. Putin at the moment being the leader of the nation? Crimea, the very people of this place, they decided to join then the Soviet Union. That's what is coming towards, because we are explaining sections after the Gentile Netzer was then once again united. If you understand the Israelic lineages instructions, then you will enjoy listening to this. If you are bored already, then don't listen anymore, because go and get yourself then bored with the Greco-Roman translation, and more than likely you won't read it because you don't understand. But if you take some time and understand its Israelic lineage, and then do some research and then study, then you will enjoy it. So then, let's then evaluate what the Ukrainians are doing. They did not like the Crimea joining up again with Moscow, and then they start a fight. That's the gist of it. The Creator never made a mistake when he said through Daniel that the northern kingdom shall come with much equipment. An army with much equipment, what can you understand? Must be greater than the former. Where do we find this? Very, very specific. You can find this section in the previous verse. Then the king of the north, he shall raise a host greater than the former. Prior of this chapter explains the relationship with the northern kingdom, then Egypt, the first customer of the arms of the Soviet Union. Then prior to these you find the Gentile Netzar in the 7th verse of the 11th chapter. It's explaining very precisely a system of the Soviet Union or the Northern Kingdom, once again joining up with others of their own places, and they must become greater than the former. So who caused the war over there were then the Ukrainians. The Creator never made a mistake. So then, since this section then is taken care of, let's understand another section regarding the United States and the NATO forces. Now they have a gang over there. Now they have many countries involved with this rapid response force. Can you imagine the number of arms and money involved with this? But US more than likely is much joyous, because they are fighting then in Iraq. They are going to fight then again in Somalia. They have some skirmishes in Afghanistan. It is absolutely marvelous, isn't it? Such a scoundrel's expenses they cannot even get a hold of, yet they want more arms sold. That's what moves the economy of the United States. So then, after this last section of it done in scoundrel's way, let's then move on and understand why then the Northern Kingdom must later come with much equipment. Understandably, President Obama was speaking, and then he said it is a trial period, and they want to also to involve the Arab nations in their own schemes. It won't work. They can be sure of it. They won't be part of it. China is not part of it, and China is the dragon spoken of by then Daniel the prophet, and the system is very precise. Dragon simply means precision, as devil simply means slanderer, mocker. Anything that's holy he mocks. But then his facet has changed in 09 from slanderer to precision, from devil to dragon. Times and the seasons then have changed. Since we understand these very simply, because you can find these later on in Revelation, when you read and you find then Yohanan speaking of these, and that dragon and that devil, blah blah blah, each of those characteristics, they have a time and a place. So you're not reading simply names of the same person, you are reading facets. As Yahweh Gibor or Yahweh Nissi, each of those facets there is a sense. Thus Shaliach Shaul has said, exercising your senses in the 5th chapter of Hebrew. So then the enemy has the same situation. He has facets. At this time it's working via precision. And including the Arab nations in their schemes of the West, it won't work whatsoever, not even in 1,000 years. But let's then understand why it won't work. Because the Arabs, they are set of making a deal with China and remaining with them. For instance, Germany is in trouble, the Eurozone is down, America is bankrupt, Brazil is bankrupt, Japan is bankrupt, Australia is nearing bankruptcy. So those nations, they are already starting with a number of their very own economies in trouble. And now they want to include the Arabs in the midst of them. They won't do it. The glamorization of armed forces and military, those are far gone in the past. It is true nations should have armies to protect the borders, but glorifying destruction is no longer part of this time of the restoration period. Read, for instance, the 61st chapter of Yeshayahu, chapter 1:8. You find even the Gentiles were included in the plan of restoration. And then the Gentiles will take care of your vineyards and your flocks. This is showing the testifiers of the Messiah being part of these plans. So you find Revelation, the 6th chapter, what do you find? And then those who were making testimonies on behalf of the Messiah, those are the same ones that were in Yeshayahu chapter 1:8. And the same ones obviously in the 61st, when the cities are then returning. These are layers from times and seasons, but they join together. So let me ask you this. Do you think then the northern kingdom should be separated? Do you think the Ukrainians are going to win this skirmish? No, they won't. They will be joined up with the Soviet Union as they were before. At some point, at some time. Maybe when the economies of those other countries they get busted, then they will at the end be joined again with Moscow. So then, the trial period already started and ended. It won't work. It's a waste of time. If they are going to try then to draw the Arab nations involved in this group of those countries, trying to do more with these rapid response forces, it won't work. It simply won't. We have the answer already in front of us. So let's not be ridiculous in trying then to change the world by those ideals of the 1,000 years of deceit, because we are no longer during those times. There is another economy of the world, another system of the Pacific. And what the West is doing won't work. Simply won't work. Each nation should defend themselves, they should. But as far as joining a force and going against Islam, never. It won't work, simply won't work. It is speaking of more than 1,000 years of experience of these people ever since the time of Ibrahim. So then, later on comes then the understanding of other nations being joined up with the Soviet Union. You find then these Netzer then obviously joining themselves So at this time, at this moment, it is fast, but the details are very spaced. We already found then China making a deal with the Congo, and China making deals with the Soviet Union, with Moscow. You find deals then with the Soviet Union and Cuba. The next step is then Moscow making a deal with Egypt. It is absolutely extremely important, because we can read these very precisely on the 8th verse of the 11th chapter. As we understand, Cuba was then forgiven of more than 90% of the debts ever since the time of the Soviet Union in the past, in the 60s. But then from these Gentile nets are gathering. And a very short while ago, Cuba was then obviously forgiven of the debt. Shortly after this event comes a deal with Egypt. It is so clear, as if you were reading the paper. We are reading the paper of the next few months today. So the next step of the Northern Kingdom, or Moscow, is making a deal with Egypt. When they do this, regarding arms, regarding then the new system of China, regarding the new trade system, infrastructure. When they do this, when the Northern Kingdom joins with Egypt, then other avenues will be opened. You can be sure of it. This is absolutely true. Step-by-step formation. Then later on, we must evaluate then the gathering of more information then regarding the Northern Kingdom and the establishment of the vision. Then we find then the covenant. Then there is obviously from Egypt, Northern Africa, until reaching Congo, Rwanda, the region of places of very rich mines in rare materials. Then you find the covenant. This is precisely what then Shaliach Shaul has said to his people would come, regarding then the functions, and his people once again are and must be functioning in the very near future. The land of Cush, as Yeshayahu the prophet prophesied. So those functions where then Shaliach Shaul was doing his work during his time of duty. So many of us explaining then these areas will help those Hebrews then return to the service. And believe me, some of them will. Very exciting times. We are going to study then the covenant in the next video. Please stay tuned. Much more coming up.